Oh, wait. I got the camera going the wrong way.
Oh, that's all right.
There we go.
Hi,
Hey.
welcome in.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know why. I just didn't want. I had it going through my computer, and it was not wanting to do that at all. So I've switched over to a different device.
We have storms in the area. I'm just blaming it on that. Barometric pressure changes, the full moon, whatever we can, right?
That works too. That works too.
I love your wing chair.
Thank you. I am actually the fourth generation in my family with this exact chair.
Oh, I'm jealous.
So, yep, it's a great grandparent, a grandparent, an aunt, and now me.
Oh my gosh. Well, congratulations. It looks like it's in great condition.
It really is.
Okay,
It's a good library chair.
Yeah. So let's get off the chair and talk about your writing. Tell me, how did you get into writing or being an author?
So I can't think of a time I wasn't telling stories. I mean, I've been really have been writing stories since I was a little kid. You know, making little books with short stories and terrible illustrations. And then had I remember my granny dictated a short story on a lava monster. So I mean, I really have been writing stuff. James Bond pastiches. My histories of our own sports teams that we had in the yard.
That's awesome.
And then been writing wrote Star Wars stories, and I always was trying to tell a story. And then when I got to high school, I really started trying to write my own story, really trying to write my own stories. And that's, you talk to anyone who's been a writer, right? There's this time when you're writing, and you're writing your stories, but they're not where they need to be. And then eventually you finally hit a spot where you go, oh, I've hit there. And now I you keep improving, but you've hit that level you were always wanting to be at.
Right.
When you were a kid. And for me, it was about halfway through college when I think I started writing when I hit a level where I was writing seriously.
Yeah.
So it's been, since I was a tiny kid, I have been telling stories, and I don't know what else to do, so I keep doing it.
No, that's awesome. They're so enjoyable. And Ayla says, hi, Mr. Odom.
Hello, Alyssa.
I know we talked about how to say her name earlier. It's so pretty. Yeah.
Well, she's one of my students, and my students know that I'm a Luddite. I don't like technology as much as I use it. So like my device here is a smartphone, but it's not actually my phone. I use it when I travel.
Really?
Never. No. Yeah. That's it. So that's what I switched over to. So I guess it works with smartphones, but not laptops.
Interesting. Well, I'll make that a mental note for anyone else. That's cool. So you probably live forever because you're not getting the radiation that everyone else is with their phones,
Well, as my students also will tell you, there's a running joke that I am immortal. So,
So there you go. I back it up. I support that. So tell me about what are some of your authors that really inspired you?
So there's a lot, but I guess we can nail it down to 3. So there are 2 authors that I read one of their books, or some of their works, I should say, and I don't know if you've ever had the experience where the world felt so real, it felt like the whole world just rolled out in your brain.
Yeah.
And first time reading Lord of the Rings by Tolkien, had that experience. And there was another inkling, same writers group, a guy named Charles Williams, who's one of the lesser known guys, but he wrote a cycle of King Arthur poetry that's very dense. There's still plenty in that cycle that I don't know what he was really trying to say. He's a very modernist poet in that way. But I had that same experience, and the world building of everything is rolling out and creating something new, almost like the world itself existed, even though it's just on the page. And so both those guys were really influential with kind of the ambition of what writing can be.
Yeah.
And I definitely would say there's some heavy influence there for me in different ways. I've written some stories that are very world building. I don't have a tendency to write series. I don't really write sequels to stories. I mean, I have a couple sci-fi stories that kind of exist in the same world, but they're not continuations. But like my fantasy stories, my longer works, they're standalone works. But the idea of building a true world, as Tolkien would call it, subcreating a true world, is really fun to me. And I think that's really the great ambition of writing, is to try and create something where the world feels like it's real, even though it's completely made up.
Right. That makes sense.
And Williams is very image-driven. He's a very acquired taste. Like you might pick up a book of his and hate it almost immediately, and then there's people who absolutely adore him. I've read most of his novels. I got 2 left, and for me, there's a couple novels that are meh, and a couple novels I'm like, oh my god, this was amazing.
Yeah.
And so there's been at times in some parts of some of my books where that real image focus of his has been an influence. But he's very wordy. Tolkien's very wordy. They both have a tendency toward very florid prose.
Mm-hmm.
And my third, and I call him my second favorite writer, he's my third influence, is a guy named Michael Shara. And if any of y'all out there like military history and historical fiction, his son Jeff Shara writes just a ton of military history books. But he's most famous for writing The Killer Angels, which the 4-hour epic movie Gettysburg is based off of.
Really?
And what I learned from Michael Shara, he also wrote the wonderful little novel For Love of the Game, which is the Kevin Costner movie is based off of. The Kevin Costner baseball movie is based off that. The book is way better than the movie. It is a 150-page novel. Go read the book, and then you can go watch Kevin Costner, who did a great job. He was great.
Yeah.
But what Shara taught me in reading those 2 books, and I've read all 5 of his novels, is you can create something that feels so real, but your prose can be simple. So, right. And I think that was a really important lesson I was learning in college when I was first reading him and other stuff, and the wide variety you read at college, is prose can be imaginative, it can be poetic. It doesn't have to have a $10 vocabulary word every other word.
Yes. I struggle with that. Or too wordy.
A wide vocabulary is great.
Oh, fantastic.
But you need to write in a way that every reader can understand exactly what you mean. That you don't get in the way of yourself trying to tell the story. And so Michael Shara really helped me learn that. And his only 2 of his books are still kind of are in print, and that's Killer Angels and Game For Love of the Game. His other novels are usually out of print. You got to get them used off of Amazon or whatever. But I think they have his complete short stories now, and I think they're all on ebook on Amazon now. But
okay.
But if you want the actual books, but I love him his books a great deal, and they taught me a lot. I think about how to be a writer. And he also said, basically, at the end of the day, you keep chugging along, and you're always going to have critics. And if you've ever tried getting anything published, the most common answer for a writer is no.
Yeah, I can imagine.
we don't do this for the praise because we get more rejection than anything else.
Yeah, and that's
Um,
tough. You got to have thick skin.
you really do, and I've been very fortunate the last couple of years or so to have a little bit of success getting a small number of yeses, but it was more yeses than I'd ever had before.
That's good.
I had one little short story, 500-word contest, won a prize in it. So I can say I'm an award-winning author because of that story for the rest of my life.
Right.
Is it much of an award? No, it's not. But it's my award, and therefore it means everything. But that was 2015. I didn't have anything else accepted until 2 years ago. So it's the most common answer you get is no, and you have to, if you can't deal with that, if you aren't writing because you like to write,
Right.
it's going to be really difficult, and that's experience. But there's plenty of people who've said that over the years, who have a much greater resume than I do. But it's very true. If you're not writing because you want to write, then you're not. Your stories are going to get stuck. You're going to have writer's block that you'll never get out of, and eventually you'll get tired and fed up and give up.
Yeah. Which you should.
And which you shouldn't do. Exactly. Like I'm writing a short story right now that it was pulling teeth, and to some extent still is, but it's starting to make a turnaround because I switched from typing to writing on a legal pad. I found just needed something to change to get a different flow going, and so for the last week or so, a little bit more has been able to start developing there than had been before. But that's because I was determined. I'm like, no, this is a story I want to tell. I just got to figure it out. I got to not give up on the puzzle and figure it out. So,
Right.
but that's the fun of writing, is trying to solve your problems.
Exactly. And that was going to be my question. It was if you encounter writer's block, how do you deal with it? And it sounds like you just kind of try and adjust how you produce.
Sometimes it's easy as that, which in this case it is. But my first story I had published a couple years ago on the journal Mythic Circle, was called Symphony of Rosaline. It's a good fantasy story about a dragon a girl whose village gets destroyed by a dragon, and the aftermath, the very magical aftermath of what occurs. That story I wrote about a page and then got stuck and really couldn't figure out where I was going next. I didn't touch it for over a year.
Oh, wow.
So sometimes it's put aside, move on, come back to it when you come up with an idea, or and it just kind of depends on the story and where you're at, and whether or not you have other projects or ideas or things like that. So every writer's block is different. Every story is different. My detective novel that you graciously reviewed earlier this year, and I appreciate the review a lot. That was written in an absolute manner.
While you're talking, I'm gonna grab it. So,
but yeah, that was written in an absolute manic 6 days.
What?
So what? A good friend of mine who, yep, absolute manic 6 days, and it was typed. It was all typed. There's no handwritten first draft on that. Of this.
Thank you.
Of this little book.
Yes, I'm flabbergasted. I can't process.
Yeah. My good friend of mine who had retired. She was actually one of my first teachers I worked with. She was on my original team when I first started teaching, and she said, "Hey, there's this contest on Amazon, and that you might be interested in." And it's one of those contests you got to try and get people to interact. Hit like and follow and all this, and
Yeah.
And I did respectable. I wasn't a finalist, but I did respectable from what I could tell. But when she sent this to me, it was 2 days before students showed up, and
Oh my
and
gosh.
and I'm like, okay, I have 6 days before really we hit the gear where I'm gonna be absolutely lost for the next month and a half, 2 months teaching. And so I'm like, well, then I have to brainstorm tonight. I have to start tonight, and then I basically have to do a chapter a day. They had all the requirements, which was minimum of 10,000 words and a minimum of 10 chapters. And so I wrote 18,500 words and 10 chapters in 6 days. And then I was editing a little bit here and there as they started getting posted. But yeah, the first draft was written in 6 days, and it was almost twice as it was more than twice as many words as I wrote the entire summer vacation. Uh, so writing is weird. Writing is weird. You get and again, that was typed. There was the inspiration of a very big time crunch. It started with the title. That's all it did. And so Moonlight and the Tombstones was written because like werewolves. What's a werewolf title? Moonlight and the Tombstones. Oh, that's not a werewolf title. That's a film noir title. And then I brainstormed 10 chapter titles, and built, one at a time, 10 chapter titles with like a 2-sentence blurb. And then I wrote a minimum of 1,000 words for every chapter based off of 2-sentence blurbs. And for the most part, it followed what I originally brainstormed that first night. There's a couple things that changed along the way, but for the most part, the brainstorm is what became the book.
Well, I loved it so much because it felt like an old, like, like those movies that are in like is it sepia tone where it's kind of like brown and it's very like mysterious.
Well, I go film noir, just old black and white. Humphrey Bogart, the detective. Yeah. Look, the detective was wearing a fedora. There's a beautiful woman, and we have no clue whose side she's on.
Yep.
So it was very deliberate to feel like one of those old film noirs.
I loved it.
Yeah, and it was so much fun. But the irony is the two novels I have published. I have a couple novels that aren't published, and a large poetic cycle that's not published that I would like someday to see the light of day through perhaps a more proper, more than just self-published avenue, which is why they're not out there yet. I guess I'm holding them back in my back pocket, at least for a little while longer.
Yeah,
yeah. But the other one was also a writing contest. So that is a novel called Letters from the Frontier, and it's told entirely through letters. It's a fantasy novel. There's some mysterious and powerful thing is destroying towns north of the kingdom, so they're mobilizing for defense when they don't know what the crap's going on. And it's all told in letters from the soldiers, the civilians, the generals, the king. The whole thing is told in letters. And that book was written also unofficially. It was an unofficial National Novel Writing Month book. Because as a teacher, there's no way there's no way I can hit in November 50,000 words, which is the writing goal for the official writing goal for NaNoWriMo. So I set myself a smaller goal, a manageable goal, which was, since it was being told in letters, 5 letters a day. I wrote 5 letters a day. And so that book got written by hand. That was a handwritten first draft, entirely handwritten first draft. 150 letters written in 30 days. And then I spent a year revising and editing it. And I'm sure there's still mistakes.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is you perform well under pressure.
As with all good human beings, nothing gets done if it weren't for the 11th hour.
Right. That's insane.
And my students, and I know some of you are watching, I know that y'all do a lot of things last minute too. So do I.
That's awesome. So what do you teach?
I'm a social, despite all the literary stuff, I'm a social studies teacher. I teach world geography and world history.
Oh, that's awesome.
which provides plenty of inspiration. Though I don't really write historic fiction but events in history and characters and people in history provide inspiration sometimes. But I haven't really given my hand at historic fiction, though. I do have the ambition one day, because I am the kind of nerd who has a favorite obscure Roman emperor.
Of course.
Because as the internet did teach us a few years ago, right? All men think about the Roman Empire multiple times a day.
Are you talking about TikTok?
I don't remember. I don't know which social media it started on, but it was ever. How many times do you think about the Roman Empire? I'm like, crap, I do think about it at least once a day. All right, okay. But there's an emperor who was only in power for 80 days, and I'm fascinated by his story. And one day I'm going to tackle that as a historical fiction. So if I ever do historical fiction, the world can already know what it'll be. It'll be.
Well, just send it to me, and I'll read it. It sounds good.
But yeah, so it's inspiration comes from everywhere, though. It's which is the fun bit of writing. You never know where something's going to. Actually, with the Letters from the Frontier, if you every name, because you're working so quickly. Every name in that book is like everyone who was a captain has some connection to a Star Trek captain. Their name has some connection, whether it's the actor's name or whether it's the actor's name or the character's name. Like everyone who had the rank of captain in that book had a connection to Star Trek. So like you just pull from whatever you got.
Right, for sure. That's awesome. That's interesting. Because my next question was going to be, do any of your characters, or how, what do you get inspiration for? I've lost train of thought. Sorry. Let me collect myself because I'm still baffled about the 6-day thing. What inspiration do you get from for your characters, if it's from anybody? But you said like historical figures.
Well, the historical figures help. One of the things, if you read anybody's books on writing, they all have different advices, different advice to give. And at the end of the day, like stuff about how to write, what your routines for writing should be, throw all that out the window. Mm-hmm. That you got to just find what works for you. But the one thing that's very common, and I think is very true, is you need to read widely. Read classics, read modern books, read junk reads, read high reads, because they teach you different characterization, and then it all will also then in the back of your brain mix together to create new things that you aren't even conscious that is being influenced by this book you read in 10th grade and this book you read as a 35-year-old. Right. And so, the one thing I can tell you that doesn't inspire, I do not write autobiographically. So my character, I'm not saying that my life and my experiences don't influence what I write. They 100% do. But sure. Never is there someone in there going, oh, that's the stand-in for me. Like right. There's never a stand-in, this is Bryce figure in the book. Like, On the Road by Jack Kerouac is really just Jack Kerouac going on a road trip with his buddies and just being stupid idiots.
Right.
But thinking that they were great poets.
Oh, sure.
So I don't do that, but it's but my experience in life do of course bring influence to it, and then what I've read and what I've studied over the years brings influence as well.
That's awesome. So I've learned that there are plotters and there are pantsers in the writing process. Where do you fall in those?
What's the second one?
Pantsers, where you fly by the seat of your pants and you let the storyline take you wherever it goes. I had to Google it because I was like, "You're all messing with me."
I've never heard that term either. So if they're not messing with you, they're from a particular corner of the internet
right.
that I am not on. So It depends. Short stories, I rarely plot out a short story. I'll have a general idea of what I want. The ones that I have a more complete idea of what I want do usually get written quicker. Um, but I don't usually plot out for those. The longer works usually have a plan. If I'm writing um, all my novels that have been published and unpublished had a plan when I started. Letters from the Frontier would be the closest to being flying by the seat of the pants. Mostly because I was just you're trying to put the piece together, and it's not a detective novel, but because you're trying to figure out what the crap is going on,
Yeah.
there is a very mystery build to it for about half the book or so. And so you're trying to put those pieces together. But I knew from the beginning what the mysterious thing was. I knew from the beginning that the book was going to end at a siege. Now,
Yeah, that was powerful.
yeah. Now I would say in that a lot of the original plan did get scrapped. So
Oh no.
and so it did become a lot more of flying by the seat of my pants as I wrote it, but I knew where it was going.
Yeah.
Because I knew what changes I was making to along the way, and so it was kind of controlled flying by the seat of the pants.
Controlled chaos. I
Um,
understand that.
like that was a bit more of controlled chaos. I've, I've got a wonderful book. It will probably be the next novel I self-publish. Looking to see if I can get somewhere to serialize it or something. But it's a short book, so I don't know how much any agents would really go for it. It's a little longer than Moonlight and the Tombstones, but that was basically kind of very similar to Moonlight and Tombstones. I knew what each chapter was going to be before I started writing. And that wasn't a hectic pace. That I wrote that over about 4 or 5 months. But it's called the Great Beast Cometh, and I always tell people it's my COVID story because it's about a giant unstoppable monster bringing death everywhere, and your fallen characters are locked in a room and can't go anywhere. Can't possibly imagine how COVID could possibly influence that. Uh, but that was very planned. That was very planned out. I knew what was happening, but as with the case of also with Letters from the Frontier, things change as you go, and so that's the fun part when you're doing the larger project is you have your plan, but you're making adjustments on the fly because you wrote something like, oh, I need something that tells this story, or I'm not, I thought I was getting character from point A to point B, but I'm really skipping from A to C, and I've got to create a point B. So getting to point C makes sense. And so that's a lot of fun. And I don't. And that's really where I go with every project's different. Some are really well planned out. My first novel that I wrote took 4 years to write, and there was a plan there. It just as things change, it just was. I don't know. I think I was really overly ambitious. I think that's one thing. Talking earlier about getting out of your own way.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of getting out. I was trying for the first time to write something. I mean, that book ends up being about twice as long as Letters from the Frontier, if not more. And I was having to learn how to do that on the fly because I'd never been that ambitious before.
Yeah.
But then I have a cycle of poetry, which I really want to get out there in some way, shape, or form. And that and my first novel probably are the two things this summer I'm my goal is to try and do some agent querying, because it's King Arthur. It's very world building. It's narrative poetry. I don't write a lot of poetry, but when I do, it's usually narrative poetry. And that was so much fun to do because I wrote one narrative poem. And for those of y'all watching, you can actually read this poem. It's on my little short story, my little poetry collection, Grain of Sand. And it's about King Arthur, and it's a very pivotal moment in King Arthur legend, where Guinevere is, yeah. So it's every version of King Arthur has some moment where Guinevere is almost killed for her affair, and Lancelot saves her, and it just wrecks everything. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I'm telling my version of that in that poem. And I'm like, okay, this is really good. Maybe one day, I'll come back and write like a spiritual prequel and sequel to it. They won't be direct, but one day that'll do a thing. And then a few months later, I wrote, for lack of a better word, sonnet. It is not actually a sonnet, but for a lack of a better word, this little sonnet about Arthur pulling the sword out of stone. Zero connection whatsoever. And then I switched careers briefly and went to sales for a couple years. And I was on a lunch break out on some small town, didn't have an appointment for a little bit, could afford to take the full hour for a lunch break, and wrote a narrative poem, also unconnected to the other two. And then I was like, but I could write this and then that and then this, and I started going, well, if I write that, then I got this there and I got this here. And it went from one poem by the end to being 25 poems. And it was always constantly going, okay, well, if I told this, then I can tell this over here. And if I told this over here, now I can go back and tell this. Or if I told this over here, I have to tell this over here. And so that was also about a 4-year process, but that was a completely unplanned cycle it wasn't planned to start a cycle. I was in the middle of writing a cycle before I knew I was.
Wow.
And so, again, that's why writing's so much fun. You never know what's going to happen.
For sure. Yeah, I definitely sense that. And just add a little bit of chaos and you got 25 poems.
Yeah, sometimes you're sitting bored. You're sitting bored, and you got. I've written flash fiction before because I was sitting somewhere bored and I had a card that was blank on the back. I'm like, all right, I'm challenging myself. I'm gonna write an entire short story that fits on the back of a card about yay big.
See, that just baffles my mind because I am not a writer. I would love to. I guess there's like a mental block there for me. But that is just amazing to me how it just kind of spills out at times. And it
really is. And that's cool. And to continue all the shameless plugs, that story where I wrote on the back card was called The Writer. I wrote it in church. Before the service started.
Shame for
though
shame.
I had God, I hope God does love me because I have written in the middle of sermons I was bored in.
Inspiration comes where it comes, right?
Exactly.
You're there.
But if you want to read The Writer, you can see it in my short story collection, The Light of All Lights, which is the title comes from Dracula. Tolkien and Cher may be my favorite writers, but Dracula's my favorite novel.
Oh, yeah.
And there's this wonderful line where Van Helsing is speaking some comfort to a very traumatized Mina Harker, and he tells her, there are darknesses in the world, and there are lights, and you are one of the lights, the light of all lights. And so I pulled the title for the collection from that line.
That's amazing. I love that. What does your editing process look like?
That would be my greatest weakness as a writer. I would advise everyone to have a friend who reads their work, is good at editing, and you trust to give you feedback. Because I've got one of my best friends here, here in Macon. He off and on, he's a writer. He doesn't write as consistently, but he's a very talented writer in his own right. And he'll read my stuff and he'll give me feedback. And oftentimes, and I think this is also key, if you're looking for critical feedback, most of us do not take that well. I know I don't. Get it in writing, because then then it's not an attack on your ego. Then you don't feel the need to defend every single thing that gets pointed at you.
Right. I could see that.
And that I think really helps, because if you can get over your own ego, which is not easy to do. We're human. It's not easy to do.
Absolutely
but
not.
Once you get to bringing in the criticism, whether it's because you got angry and then it waited 5 days, you went, damn it, they're right. Which has happened to me on multiple occasions. If you can either do it that way or just get in writing, okay, I see what you're saying. All right, that makes sense. That helps with making adjustments here and there. I am not the kind of editor who will completely rewrite something. I'm not I think it's partially I'm just not a perfectionist. When I send something out to be read, I want it to be in best shape it possibly can be. But I don't get hung up naturally on, is the word choice the absolute best every single line of the story. Right. For me, it's an overall effect, and if I'm creating my overall effect, I don't worry as much about minutia. Where there are people who are like, no, I've got to find the exact combination of words every single line, and I'll do that for key moments, but I don't get hung up on that in the long way. So I'm not a great editor because of that. I guess it's a little bit, I kind of yes and myself. If in improv you have to yes and whoever came before you, and I'm like, okay, this was my first draft. As long as I don't hate what I wrote, then it's good enough to then build on. And you work on, okay, you go back and read through it. You're trimming your word choice a little bit, getting rid of wordy sentences. If passive voice really, I don't mind passive voice. I actually use it plenty, but does the passive voice get? Are you staying with that way too long?
Right.
So do I need to bring more of an active voice in, things like that? That'll come, but really a lot of back to the 11th hour thing. A lot of my editing, most of my editing is probably when it's time to. All right, I found someone who will actually might consider taking this story, and then I'll go back and read through it. I just submitted a short story the other day. Changed the title. The title's been that. I wrote that. It's a little 1,000-word story, and it was a journal. I found a journal that was doing shorter fiction, and I was like, and I was reading through it. I'm like, you know what? This line right here has a line I can use that has a better title than I have, so I completely changed my title, and then I had to cut. It was only 1,000 words. I was at 1,000 words on the mark, so I was changing things here and there, and that led to some interesting word choice changes and being more efficient in a few places. But that's, for me, a lot of that comes down to, when it's time to submit. But I don't go through, I don't do 5 rewrites and then call the story done. I write through to a draft, and then I go, all right, and did I pick a way along on the path to where I wanted to go? And if I said yes, I actually got exactly where I wanted to be, then I'm usually pretty satisfied. And then I get feedback, from friends. My friend Ross, who is my main editor, he'll go, "What was your intention?" I'm like, "This." I'm like, okay, then you did it.
a good
or
question.
or did you or were you trying to do more? If you're trying to do more, then you need to do this, this, and this. So he's a great friend to have because you got to find someone you trust. That's the key thing. You got to find someone you can trust, and you need another eye. That would be the thing. No matter whether you're someone like me who's just not a perfectionist, or you're like George R. R. Martin, who can't write one book in, in 10 years or whatever it is at this point. You know, you need you read over your stuff. You know what you want to say. You think you said what you wanted to say, and then you need someone else to come in and just give you a different eye that's not yours. That's not biased.
Interesting.
And doesn't know the words like the back of your hand
Yeah.
because you just wrote it. You know it. You know what you said. Of course, it's a masterpiece. No, it's not.
Well, I mean, I think that's subjective. I enjoyed Moonlight
I mean,
Meditations.
thank you so much. I mean, have you ever seen the movie Midnight in Paris?
No, I haven't.
Highly recommend. Owen Wilson plays this character, goes back to 1920s Paris, and he meets Ernest Hemingway at one point. And Ernest Hemingway says, "Look, if you're going to be a writer, declare yourself the best writer, and then be willing to fight basically anyone who says otherwise." Right. Well, he says, except when I'm in the room, because I'm the best writer, unless you want to put on the gloves and decide it. So the whole idea, you've got to be confident. You've got to say, no, I've written something and it's worth reading, and it's worth reading by other people than just me.
Right. Exactly. We have a couple comments. Nick the Sixth says that we also read your stories, Mr. Odom, so I'm guessing he's a student.
Yep.
And then Jessica said that she's that person, but she'd rather be like you. I guess she's a perfectionist, which I know Jessica, and her art is amazing too. So
yeah, Jessica, I could benefit from being a little more perfectionist. And I kind of, again, I shop it out to my friend Ross. I try and make it up with other people.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and what you can't do is surround yourself with those that can,
Exactly.
You can't, it's impossible to do everything. It's just, that's not human nature. So that's what friends are for.
Exactly.
Let's see. What's your least favorite part of writing?
Editing.
That's what I was going to guess.
At this point, I've been rejected so many times. It's just what I expect to happen anyway. So that doesn't bother me anymore. And I've been in sales. Actually, when I got my sales job, I told my boss who I interviewed with, I asked, look, you've been in teaching, how do you deal with, the most common answer you'll have in this job is rejection. How do you deal with that? I'm like, yeah, no, I'm a writer. That's 100% what I do all the time anyway.
Right. Got that thick skin.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. What's the most surprising thing that you've learned about yourself through this process?
I don't know if I'm that self-reflective. But
you are going to be today.
I guess for me it's a confidence builder. That I gain confidence from it because there are all these challenges, and then also being able to get over your own self. And when you have failures, I mean, I had one story one time, wrote 2-3 paragraphs, really liked the first paragraph in particular, had a good title, had nothing else to go with, and I kept it on my computer but gave it up for lost. And a lot of that story ended up, the vague ideas of that were behind that story got cannibalized into another story later on. So your failures are, when you have failures, they're building you to your next success, hopefully.
That's what I was going to say.
But being someone who intentionally allows their life to influence their writing, but not put their life in their writing. I think probably is the most uh, personal comment I can make on that, because that's probably how I deal with life as it is too.
Me too.
Just you know, it's all right. I'll deal with this thing right now, and whatever I feel or emotion, that's for over here, and we're just going to deal with what's in front of us at the moment. So, how I approach fiction probably is a reflection of how I do that in life too.
Whenever an idea comes to you, is it mostly in like a dream, or like
I've
does it
only
just
had
kind of hit you out of nowhere?
I've only had one dream that genuinely became a